The Stormbreak Open is in just 3 days. Hello, everyone, and welcome to FECast, the official podcast of Friends of Eternal. The Stormbreak Open is in just 3 days from the recording of this podcast, and that means that we will have, within a week, the first person who qualifies specifically for 2021 Worlds. I know there's always a caveat that Lights Out Ace is already qualified, but the first person who needs to qualify, that will be qualified, is going to be determined this weekend, and boy, there's not much that's more exciting than that. Well, aside from perhaps the fact that there's also a new set released today that we'll be playing with this weekend. So we are going to break down every card in the new set and break down the decks that we expect to do well this weekend. I am your host, Sunny, and of course with me is 2020 World's top 8 competitor, Stormblessed. How are you doing today?
Excuse me, I believe I am a top 4 Worlds competitor, which also technically is top 8, that is true.
Okay, so like the next time someone says that I got 4 top 8s in ECQs, I'm going to be like, excuse me. I have 2 top 8s, but also a top 4 and a win. So get your numbers straight. Okay, anyway, yeah. Oh boy, this is a great time to be alive and playing Eternal, right?
Yeah, the new set has some really cool cards, and I don't know how closely listeners of FECast were following along with spoilers on the Eternal Discord and other places. But before today, we saw, I believe, 17 of the 21 cards, and of the cards that were spoiled today, there were a lot. There was a couple of really powerful ones, and we'll be discussing the new ones and the old ones, though none of the stuff with you we discussed yet. But yeah, we'll be just hopping right into it because there are 21 new cards, and the set is called Stormbreak, and it's got Storm in the name, so I'm deeply excited for it.
Yeah, and after we finish covering all the cards, of course, we're going to talk about the Throne metagame. We'll discuss what's going on with TNE, but before all of that, even, I just want to give a quick shout out for some of our earlier episodes here on FECast that might be worth listening to, might be worth revisiting. If you are looking to put your best foot forward for these tournaments that qualify for Worlds, we've done some great podcasts here that had fantastic insight, whether they be from guests or hosts. And I just wanted to point them out so that people who are looking to get better at their game can go ahead and do that. So the 3 that I picked is episode 30, which is Maximizing Your Chances, featuring Collector, where we talked about gameplay, how to have some of the tightest gameplay that you could have. And there's no one better to talk about that with than Collector, who has, and this was recently calculated by SRFS, now in the Eternal History Project. Now there's a day 2 match win percentage, because Collector's is a whoppingly disgusting 73% on day 2, so almost winning 3/4 of his matches in the elimination stages of an open.
And notably, this is extra relevant because of, if you've played one tournament and you spike that tournament and you win it, that's obviously an accomplishment. No one's going to take it from you. But obviously saying that you have 100% match win rate on day 2s is less meaningful than Collector, who has 13 day 2s. Now, it says, I believe it says 15 on the page, but that does count the 2 Worlds appearances, which are not counted in the match win percentage. So of 13 day 2s at ECQs and challenges and in quarterlies, Collector has a almost 75% win rate, which is just absurd across 13 day 2s, which is a lot of day 2s.
Yes. Sorry, I said 73%. It's actually 74%, so even better. Anyway, so that's episode 30 with Collector and myself. And episode 36 is my legendary Everybody is Trash at This Game and the Mindset of Improvement. Definitely go listen to that if you haven't already. It's not just an ego trip, even though the title may make it seem that way. It has a lot to do with making sure you're in the right mindset to improve with your practice. And finally, the last episode that I picked is episodes 39 and 40, which is Building the Tournament Winning Decklist, featuring Batteries and Stormblessed. And we talk about decks that have done well in tournaments and what makes them tournament winning, basically.
These are all good options, and I hope in the future we can add to our repertoire of longer lasting podcast. As great as these casts are and as useful as I believe that they're going over metagames and stuff, obviously people aren't going to go back and listen to the Flame of Zolta spoiler reviews, right?
I don't know. I think it could be fun just seeing what people thought at the time, but but yeah, these are ones that will last for ages. Hopefully, maybe, probably. I don't know. All right, that's enough about plugging our earlier episodes. Let's get into the cards. We've got 21 cards to talk about, and if you're at home, you can go ahead and follow along. We're just doing them in the order that they are shown in the client. So the first one is Grenadin Uprising. This is a relic, costs 2 and a fire. Once per turn, you may pay 3 to play a 2/1 Grenadin with charge that dies at the end of turn. When one of your other units with more attack dies, set this ability to that attack. So, definitely expensive, but you get a charge unit every single time, and that's kind of cool. That's like seems better than Golem Forge to me.
So just one quick mechanical note I wanted just to clarify here is that the Grenadin that spawn from this have sacrifices at end of turn, so you can't recur them and keep them in forever. If you recur them with, Crawl or Dark Return, they will go away the next time you play them. I think that's just an interesting note. This card is obviously the most comparable to Phoenix Stone, which also now costs 2, and also has similar text, right? Phoenix Stone is a 2-cost relic that has a pay 3 to make, an aggressive body that lasts for 1 turn. The differences are is that Phoenix Stone makes a 4 power flyer, so it's a little more consistent that way, but it's also a little more vulnerable because once you turn it into the flyer, if they kill it, then the Phoenix Stone is gone. But with Grenadin Uprising, unless they kill the relic itself, these Grenadin aren't going to go away ever. And on top of that, they obviously can get a lot bigger, right? If you play this, and then you play a Sill, and then the Sill dies, then suddenly you're making 5/1s every turn. So it's very comparable to Phoenix Stone, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse. I certainly think it'll see play in Expedition markets.
Just want to clarify, Phoenix Stone costs 1 and then 3 to activate, but
I thought it cost 2.
Yeah.
Look, Phoenix Stone has changed. Look, they've changed. You know this if you've been a long time player of Eternal. They've changed Phoenix Stone so many times.
Yeah. In any case, I don't think that Grenadin Uprising is going to have a huge impact on this weekend, which is the big news. I don't think it's going to be a fantastic card. You're right, it might be worth a market slot, but I don't see it doing much more than that.
Okay, so moving along to our second fire card, we have Eccentric Officer, and this card is certainly eccentric in its oddball nature. It is 4 and a fire for a 2/2 with Decay. Summon. Randomly rearrange the costs of all non-power cards in your deck. And it's also a non-flying Valkyrie.
Yeah, the non-flying Valkyrie, especially with wings in the picture, is really confusing. So I guess the idea with this is that you've got helpful doorbats and like hammer hands or something, and you're hoping that some prohibitively expensive card gets the 0 cost on the doorbot, or maybe it doesn't have to be doorbot, but just like stuff that's more reasonably costed.
Yeah, you don't want to be playing this with your Krulls, with your Jotun Hurlers. You want to be playing this with other different cards. Now, the funniest thing you can do with this, I think, is if you put it in some sort of crazy 4 or 5 faction Kilo deck, and you just randomly change the cost of everything in your deck, so you spin Kilo, and you're like, what could be in my deck this time?
Yeah, or like something with Rereave, just like, who knows what's going to happen.
I think there's a lot of fun things to do with this card, but I also, there's almost no way it can be competitive unless there's some weird mechanical thing where cards can't become the same cost they were originally, and then you could like play only 0s and 10s and then make all your 10s 0s. Like, unless there's something really weird like that, I don't think this card is competitive, and I think that's a good thing, and I'm glad this card exists because I think it's going to be a very fun little meme card.
Yeah, the effect seems like a really great thing for an event or like a gauntlet boss, but I have a hard time imagining that there's going to be a tier 1 or tier 2 deck that centers around playing Eccentric Officer. All right, let's move on. And the next one is a 1-cost time relic, Privilege of Nobility. The enemy player can't make you discard or sacrifice cards. Ultimate, pay 6 to gain 1 health for each of your units and each card in your hand. Seems like a reasonable meta card if Mill is really powerful or something, but I don't think that this is good. It just doesn't seem like it does enough to stop your opponent's game plan unless they're specifically playing Mill. And the effect that you get just doesn't seem fantastic either.
Yeah, I agree with Sonny. This is purely a market metagame call. I will say that in Throne, it's probably pretty bad. In Expedition, I think it's a lot better in the market, specifically because the main board card in Expedition is a card called Equalize. And this card specifically hard counters equalize. So I think in Expedition, there's a lot more potential for this card, especially in the market. But yeah, that's about it.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about it in how it interacts with Equalize. That makes a lot of sense. All right, the next card is a card that we have been somewhat excited about, but I think it's died down some. This is a 3-cost single time spell, Prosperity of the Reach. Gain 3 health, draw a card. If there are 10 or more units in your void, put 10 of them at random into your deck and take an additional turn after this one. It doesn't have void bound, so like there's the potential for some loop, but I've been trying to think of how this would play, and man, it just seems tough. It does like it draws 2 cards if you are taking an extra turn. So like that's pretty crazy that it not only takes an extra turn but also advances your hand position. What do you think, Stormblessed? Have you gotten any good applications for this one?
The one thing I like about it is that its base case is better than Soul's Rest in a lot of ways, right? Because its base case is that it will draw you a card and it'll gain you 3 life no matter what, and it can actually be played before you actually take an extra turn. Where Soul's Rest, in some way, I'm sort of comparing having 10 units in your void to having 8 power, right? If you're playing a deck built around getting units in your void, it's somewhat comparable to having 8 power in play, right? There's some similarities. They're obviously very different, but one thing I will say is this card is also in many ways a market card, although it's not like a market interaction card. It's more of a market finisher. It turns out I did try. I was like, I'm going to put 4 of them in my deck, and I'm going to take turns. And I put 4 in my deck, and I took an extra turn. And my next draw was a Prosperity of the Reach. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't work in multiples that well.
Unless you have some way of milling yourself and getting lots of units in your void every single turn, which seems really challenging.
Someday, this card plus Delph's Awakening could be in a very, very good deck, depending on self-mill options we get in the future. That day is not really today, but eventually, it seems like we are reaching a point where we're going to have enough payoffs and enough potential ways to fill our void that cards like Delph's Awakening and Prosperity that really want you to self-mill as hard as possible might have some viability there. But until that day comes, I mean, maybe some sort of Praxis tokens list, but even then, if you're playing in a tokens list, you basically all your stuff has to die first, and then you have to rebuild, and then this card's good. It's just somewhat awkward in the end. Having 10 is a lot. If you played Delph's Awakening, having the first 10 for Delph's Awakening is okay, but you really want the second 10. You don't have 20 cards in your void for Delph's Awakening to be good. Like drawing 2 cards for 1 power is obviously good. See Levitate on Tarra.
I was about to say, that seems like a lot less work.
So this card, until we get enough synergy outlets, self-mills, I think this card is not going to be a time to shine, but someday it might be. Okay, so moving right along to a card that finally is not a market card or a meme card. It is Tarra, Ever Loyal. 3 Justice for a 3/3 Paladin. Summon. Give one of your other units Warcry 2. When an enemy kills that unit, double Tarra's attack and health, and she gets Warcry 4. This card's very controversial right now.
Do we have confirmation that killing something with like a torch or something counts as killing it? Like if an opponent kills your unit with a torch or defiance or whatever?
It doesn't say enemy unit, it says enemy, so that should, if that doesn't work, I would be incredibly shocked. And like there's no way that doesn't work. If your opponent plays defiance, that should trigger a Tarra.
All right. So, I mean, if you're playing an aggressive deck and you've got a 2-drop that they have to block or do something about, and you play Tarra on it, first of all, you get a Warcry 2 the turn that you get into play. And then if they kill it, Tarra becomes a 6/6 with a Warcry 4. Basically, every unit you're ever drawing or every weapon you're ever drawing is absolutely gigantic. This is a huge threat. Something that came to mind when I was thinking about this is just putting the buff on the Passionate Stonehammer, the 2/2 Berserk Reckless Flyer. That seems pretty good. You get 4 Warcries right off the bat. 2 they can't do anything about. And then if they kill it before it deals damage, then Tarra's a 6/6. And the 3-cost 6/6 that Warcries 4 is huge. And you already got 2 Warcries. So this seems big for a strategy that was definitely lagging behind the other powerful things that people are doing. Is it good enough? In Expedition, it's probably insane, but in Throne, well, I don't know. What do you think, Stormblessed?
This card's pretty controversial, actually. Some people think this card is good, some people think this card is unplayable, and some people think this card is only playable in Expedition. I'm leaning towards this card actually being quite good. I think this card is even potentially Throne playable. I'm not sure there's necessarily a deck for it currently, but I think this card's effect is actually quite strong. People are like, Warcry doesn't matter, and I'm like, Warcry 1 doesn't matter. Warcry 2, on the other hand, is very different. The difference between +2/+2 and +1, like take a look at this case, original cure, right? Original cure going from a 3/2 to a 4/5, that was a huge difference. Take Mid Chief Salus or whatever, a 3/2 with quick draw. If you draw it as a 4/3 with quick draw, it's like, okay, you invested a little bit and you made it, kind of better. Who cares? But if it's a 5/4 with quick draw, suddenly that's a huge threat. So Warcry 2 is very, very different than Warcry 1 in that capacity, and this card makes things very awkward for the opponent. If you play a Crown Watch Paladin, you play this, and you attack with Crown Watch Paladin, and you get Warcry 3. A lot of ways that people deal with aggro these days is either by blocking or cards like Defiance or Defile. Defile, obviously, in Annihilate can target Tarra instead of your other unit, but if they're doing that, then you get to keep your Crown Watch Paladin with the extra Warcry. You get to attack again with it. If they use the Defiance on your unit, then suddenly you get a huge terror. Another thing this card could potentially enable in the future is some sort of Argenport style aggro recursion deck that doesn't currently exist, because we haven't really had an aggressive card that has significant modifications to cards. One of the unique features of Eternal compared to other games like Magic is that when you recur a card from the void, it keeps all modifiers, right? Dark Return, you keep modifiers. So one thing that's great to do with Dark Return effects is obviously put it on cards that are modified. The closest thing we've had to an aggro card like that is Nahid's Faithful, which is a 4/4, and you bring it back, and it becomes a 6/6. Well, Terra sort of has a similar style effect, although it's not in a sacrifice deck. Warcry 2, again, is a big effect, and if you can get the 6/6 and recur it, that's another big effect. So if there's some sort of Argenport Crowlist in the future, that could be seen. All in all, I really like this card. I think this card has a lot of unique applications and is a very unique form of aggressive strategy.
If you have enough 1-drops and 2-drops that love attacking, this could be a very good curve topper. And then you have like either a ton of charge units or war helms in order to give your units charge and get the effect of the Warcry 1 turn sooner. So I think this card is the real deal. I could be wrong. It could be absolute garbage, but I think it's definitely going to roll some heads in Expedition. And I think that if someone figures out the right build, I think that could show up this weekend as being a powerhouse.
I will say that the double justice in its cost, it is 3 justice, is in some respects one of the more awkward parts of the card, right? Because you might want to play it with Rakano with, say, like Mid Chief Salus. Mid Chief Salus being, a fire card, or a Jek, which is a triple fire card, right? So this card does have somewhat of an interesting influence for cost. I'm not so sure about how influence in aggro decks works, so I don't know if it can support it or on a 2-faction deck. And the other thing I'd like to say is that a lot of people are like, oh, if the board is empty, then Terra is just a 3/3 for 3. And I agree. If the board is empty, Terra is just 3/3. That is, worst case scenario. But if the board is empty, you're probably not doing too hot in an aggro deck anyways. If you literally have no units on the board, are you doing well? Like, yes, there are cards like Milos that can help catch you up, but if you're like Yetis or something like that, obviously this card's not a Yeti card, but if you're Yetis and your board is empty, there are very, like you draw a Yeti Pioneer or you draw a Yeti Spy as your top deck or whatever. That's basically, are those cards bad just because your board is empty means that you top deck, doing things immediately? Of course not, So I think that it's kind of a flawed reason to say if your board is empty, this card is bad means equals this card is bad.
Yeah, just a note on some of the cards that you were talking about. So first of all, the Fire Evangel has Berserk, which I mentioned is pretty sweet with Warcry 2. And that can help you get the influence. But I also just don't think you're playing this with cards like Salus or Jek. Like, I think you're playing this with Glass Cannon cards, because like once you get the Warcry off, you don't really care if they die as long as they're trading with something.
Is this what's that old card, Sharpshooter?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, I was talking about how Warhelm works really well in this. So maybe, yeah.
I don't know if there's enough time though to build that deck and like make a good iteration of it.
I don't think it's hard to build. I think you just throw it all in there and see if it can hang with the other decks of the day.
Well, speaking of things that are hard to build and also probably not very good, we have Bellows Revolt, a 9 Justice legendary spell. Choose 3 units with different names and 9 attack, not 9 costs, you can't get Kairos, and 9 attack or less from your deck. The enemy player chooses 1 to play. You play the others. So this card's bad.
Yeah, it's like bad with a question mark, because you're not sure, because there might be some way to just kill someone with it.
I have one interaction that I think this card works with. that I've come up with so far.
I wonder if it's the same one that I thought of.
So basically, just to make a magic analogy here, there are similar cards with this effect in Magic. What you do with those is you play Emrakul, which is a card that basically is a 15 power unit that just wins you the game effectively. And you play a card called Flicker Wisp, which takes a card out of play and puts it back into play under its owner's control. This card, in Eternal, we have neither of those options. We can't take cards out of play and put them back into our owner's control because we have control options, so we can't just like take our units back. And we also don't have, the sort of big 15 cost finisher that would work with this. That being said, the mechanic I thought of that works with this is Tribute. Because if you say play a 4-faction deck and play like Display of Destruction to play this card, if you have a Tribute effect, presumably your opponent won't have Tribute when you're playing this because it's very difficult. So if you have Tribute, you can grab cards like Jack Lone Gun or First Flame or something, cards where the Tribute is the really powerful part of the card, and so your opponent won't get the effect, but you will. So like Jack Lone Gun, if they have to choose between 3 cards that are all Jack Lone Guns, you'll get 2 of them and you'll get to kill theirs. I don't know if there's good Tribute finishing option like this, but that's sort of the only thing I've come up with so far.
I do think you need to kill someone if you play this. What I was thinking of is Westwind Herald and the thing that pings, but like they'll just choose one of those if you go grab those, right? You need some way so that no matter what they choose, you just win.
That's the hard part, is that you have to pick 3 cards where no matter what the opponent picks, you are going to either win the game or have, an extremely unsurmountable board position when everything is all said and done. And I don't know if that's there, but I hope someone breaks it.
I'm not sure. I'm hoping if someone breaks it. I mean, how hard is it to survive and ramp to 9? Probably pretty tough.
Breaks it in a Loco Pojo capacity.
Fair enough. If you're trying to do something like that, you might as well just try to win with Taller or something.
Yeah.
So I guess the cost is probably just very fair, and it's hard to get up to 9 without having a reasonable game plan aside from it.
It looks like Direwolf pre-nerfed the card. They were afraid of it, so they wanted to pre-nerf it to make sure it had 0 chance of destroying the meta, which is fair, especially with 3 days before a big tournament.
Yeah, this is not Answer the Call for 6, thankfully.
Okay, so moving on to Primal now, we have Storm Hex, 3 Primal for a fast spell, and it's a choice spell. You can either play a fast speed permafrost on an enemy unit or create and draw a 4/4 Storm Dancer with flying, and Storm Dancers are 5 cost 4/4s with flying.
Yeah, so muster enthusiasts rejoice because this triggers muster, and it's very good at triggering muster, like for a card that triggers muster. I don't think this card is very good. The second mode on it is absolute garbage. It's just way too expensive. The first mode's actually not bad. I mean, if the first mode is great, then maybe it sees some play, but you're playing 3 times as much for that permafrost.
So the benefit is, of course, that you're getting a fast speed permafrost, which is a lot better than a slow speed permafrost, right? If Storm Dancer cost 4, I think I would absolutely love this card as is. This card has effectiveness versus any deck, right? If they're playing a unitless deck or a low unit deck, you can just make a 4/4 flyer. And if they're playing a unit deck, then you just remove their unit. Theoretically, it has the ability to play on 2 axes, on, both against 2 multiple deck archetypes. But Storm Dancer itself is just very inefficient, especially if you're paying a 3 cost premium to draw it.
Yeah. The next card's a really interesting one. It's Glen Fasciata. I have no idea how that's supposed to be pronounced. It's a 4 cost double primal Mandrake. It's a 1/1. Summon, play a 3/3 Mandrake. And ultimate, when Glen Fasciata is transformed, play a copy of the new unit. There's got to be some good thing you can do with this. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is Calibrated Evolution, and then you get 2 random 5-drops in addition to the 3/3 that you already had. Is there something better that you can do with this?
There is, actually. There's a card called Fluctuate Reality, because you can target the Mandrake it plays and itself and create 2 6-cost units and a 5-cost unit. This card is Expedition only, in my opinion. It's very much an Expedition card. Especially because we'll get to this later, but my crafty child in the future is also a 3/3 with a 1/1 that doesn't require you to jump through hoops. Has a strong summon effect, and also is 1 cost cheaper. So we'll get to that card later. That being said, I think this card is a fun little Expedition playable.
Did I say Accelerated Evolution? I meant Unstable Form. I think if both of those are Expedition legal, it's probably got legs. But as a 4 cost, 4/4 worth of stats, no battle skills, it's just not enough right up front.
Unstable Form is not legal. I don't think we have any Echo/Fate cards that give us 2 cards in hand effectively.
All All right, the next card is another triumph of the community. Congratulations to Mercurio Blue getting a card in Eternal. This is Thieving Fox. It's a 3-cost shadow card, Grenadin Beast. It's a 2/2, and it says unblockable while the enemy player has more cards in hand than you. Infiltrate, look at the top card of the enemy player's deck. You may draw it or the card below it. So just worth noting that you can only infiltrate once.
Yeah, I think Merc should have pushed his card to be more powerful. I mean, I think if this card was a 2-cost card with the same effect, I would be like solid expedition, starting point, right? You can just put it and make it a good solid little early drop to help tide you across the game, Or if this was an uncommon and a draftable set, which I think is what Merc should have pushed for because Merc's a big drafter. Other options could be like infiltrate, look to the top 2 cards in your player's deck, and you got to choose one directly instead of having to play this weird guessing game. Then it would have a better disruptive element to it. As is, it's just kind of a little bit weak, unfortunately. I love the art. Art is gorgeous and adorable, and the flavor is on point, but I think it could have been pushed a little harder.
Yeah, cool design, but kind of unfortunate in where it's released because I don't think that this is going to see constructed play the way it's costed. I think they could probably make it cost 2 and see what happens. I don't
Yep.
think it would be unreasonable. Remember that drawing cards from your opponent's deck is almost always worse than drawing cards from your own deck.
It's just a little unfortunate that it's just a little bit overcosted with a little bit too little effect, a little bit too little stats. Okay, so our next card is 5 Shadow for Gentleman Jun D'Angolo. And it is a 4/4 with quick draw, a giant rogue, and it has summon. Each player chooses 2 cards in their hand to keep and puts the rest into their market. So it's kind of like equalizes the hands, but only down to 2 maximum. And of course, once you put cards in the market, you can then pull them back out of the market later. So it kind of temporarily disrupts the opponent in that capacity.
This is an interesting card. It's great on turn 3, and it
How are you?
is not great otherwise. If you go initiate into Tokus into
Okay.
Gentleman Jun D'Angolo, it's great. But
Yeah,
aside from that, man, you have to be all in on that turn 3 play. And you also have to be like on the play. If you play it on the draw, it's probably too slow, even on turn 3. I don't know. It's like 5 cost 4/4 quick draw. That's not that threatening.
this card has more potential than someone's giving credit for. I hate to say, especially in Expedition, but especially in Expedition where things are a little bit slower. I think the effect is solid enough, not against aggro decks, but being a 4/4 is actually a real body, right? It's not nothing. It's not a 3-cost 2 to at least contest the board reasonably well. And its effect is reasonably good. So I think that this has some amount of potential because making your opponent even temporarily lose 2 cards from their hand is very solid.
All right, the next card I've actually seen a bit of because it was in the preview event, and I saw some people playing it against me. This is Shoal Custodian. It's a 4-cost time and fire 4/3 Sentinel. It has summon, put an enemy unit in the enemy player's hand, or deal 1 damage to the enemy player for each spell in their hand and increase their costs by 1. Seems like a pretty solid tempo play. I mean, it either delays their spells or sets them back by undeveloping their board, if you will. Yeah, this card seems solid. I don't know that it's going to be good enough for Throne unless you're like super aggressive and need the tempo in practice. But this seems like a nice card for Expedition.
Notably for Expedition purposes, it is also a Sentinel, so it has good Sentinel synergies because it's a solid tempo play and also just provides another Sentinel body in the deck. And as I like to state over and over again, is I like my term of critical mass for synergy-based effects. So having another solid synergy card that can allow you to utilize your synergy effects while also being solid by itself. Its base form is good. This is, the better Praxis Displacer. Instead of being a 3/3, it's a 4/3, so it attacks better. We saw earlier, Customs Officer going from a 3/3 to a 4/3 does let it be just significantly more aggressive somehow. Just that one simple stat point makes a card a lot more aggressive. And it fights against 2 decks, right? You can put a unit back in their hand to get tempo that way, or you can, against a spell-heavy deck, you can push them that way. So one thing is that it does not deal damage equal to the cards in any player's hands. It's equal to the spells in their hands. So you can't just like turn 3 dome them for 6 when they haven't been able to play anything yet. So that's probably for the best, but it's a little unfortunate.
I mean, if you play it on turn 3 and you went first and your opponent has a ton of cards in hand, it's probably getting its value that way anyway.
I mean, it might get 1 or 2 if they're playing like an even deck. They might only have like 2 spells in it. If they're playing Kira, they might only have 2 or 3 spells in their hand, which is fair enough. Obviously, better than nothing. And obviously, against Kira, making their cards cost 1 more pretty big deal actually. But it doesn't like dome them for 6, which is what I obviously wanted. I mean, a 4-cost card that has summon dome them for 6 is probably too good, but that's what I wanted.
All right, the next card's a really interesting one. Nacas Bastion Prodigy. This is a 1-cost fire justice Rakano, 1/1 Oni soldier. When you play a spell or weapon directly on Nacas, it gets amplify 1, give Nacas +1/+1. That's pretty unassuming, but you have to keep in mind, like, say you're attacking, you find a Stour and you have an extra power to pay, all of a sudden it's bigger by +1/+1 permanently. Or if you're in the late game and you have 5 power, you top deck like Finest Stour. I'm just going to keep on using the Finest Stour example. You can give it a permanent +4/+4. So, like, it's not terribly efficient, but it's not hard to imagine situations where it can kind of get out of control.
This card also has a ton of synergy-based things built into it, right? It wants to have weapons placed on it. Its spell is also placed on it. It is an Oni, so it has Oni synergy. It is also a soldier, and soldiers obviously have some synergy there. So there's also a number of potential synergy options. I'm not too keen on this card. There's a funny UI interaction with this card. When you target this with a card with Amplify, you have to be like, wait. Am I amplifying the Amplify card or Amplify Nacas? You have to end the amplifies. You have to end hardiness, and then you get another amplify window popping up saying, okay, now it's time for Nacas. So every time you do it, you're like, wait, is it finally Nacas' time, or am I amplifying the hardiness? So that's pretty funny. But I think this card is cool, but has synergy potential, but eh.
All right, I'm going to let you introduce the next one because I know you're super hyped about it.
My crafty child, the craftiest of all the cards, except for Crafty Yeti, I guess. This is a 3 fire primal for a 3/3. This is Crafty Occultist. It is in fact a cultist based on its name, and it has summon. Discard 2 cards and draw 2 cards. If you discard a spell, Crafty Occultist gets flying. If you discard a unit, you get to play a 1/1 Grenadin, a special Grenadin friend. So in a lot of ways, this is the rummage effect. If you have no cards in hand, if you have 1 card in hand, you get pure card advantage because you don't discard anything, you just draw 2 straight up. The only other card we had previous to this was Jotun Bonebreaker, who had Surge, discard a card, draw a card. And if you played a power after Jotun Bonebreaker, if that was the last card in your hand, you did in fact get to just draw a card for free. I played Jotun Bonebreaker exactly in one event, but it was a very important event, so you confirm that drawing cards for free off of this rummage effect is very good. This card has so much to it. There's so much to explain here, potential ways to use this card. My crafty child, my craftiest lad, I love them so much. But I think the basic way you should view this card is sort of a 3-cost 3/3, discard 2 cards, draw 2 cards, make a 1/1. I think if you viewed it as that, I think you wouldn't be wrong most of the time. Would you agree with that sentence?
Yeah, I don't think that this card, well, it's definitely very efficient, right? You just kind of have to think of it like as a draw spell more so than a unit that's going to impact the board a ton. Like, it's not Valkyrie Enforcer. It's not going to randomly remove one of your opponent's units. But what it is going to do is it's going to really clean up your hand and provide some board presence with it.
I definitely agree with that assessment. Most of that being said, if you can get full value, provide significant board presence, a 3/3 flyer and a 1/1 on turn 3 is actually pretty significant board presence. So I think this card can do it. Obviously, in my opinion, the best interactions are like Jotun Hurler and Zoe, because that one card triggers both of the Crafty Lad's effects. And then you get to draw 2 cards, so you're basically converting it into a Wisdom of the Elders and playing a 3/3 flyer and a 1/1. So I think, these fate cards that come with spells are obviously the first place to look at this. This card, in my opinion, is just absurd. I thought this card would be the best card of the set, and unfortunately, it's not the best card in the set. Card's still absurd. There's a really good things to do when you can just loot twice. Just discarding 2 cards, drawing 2 cards, fixing your hand, discarding the cards you don't want, drawing cards you do, and while making a board presence, right? Like, compare it to Gust Rider, which is a card that I haven't liked as much for a number of reasons. One is that Onslaught is way worse than Summon. Another is that a 1/1 flyer is a lot worse than a 3/3 and a 1/1 with or without flying. This card also, has potential Grenadin synergy, has potential Cultist synergy. It comes on many axes. It's just really good. There's so much with this card. And all I want to do in Eternal is discard 2 cards, draw 2 cards, while making an important board presence to help contest the board, so I can draw more cards in the future and discard more cards in the future. So I'm a huge fan of my crafty child.
So what type of strategy do you think it fits best in? Because I don't contest that this card is Like it just has absolutely fantastic rate, and the board presence is good. But it doesn't really fit into any of the existing decks right now. It's not a super aggressive card, although maybe it's good enough as an aggressive card. And well, it's certainly not a Sling card. Where do you put it in that
I
case?
think it is absolutely, abso-freaking-lutely a Sling card. I think this card easily slots into Sling and makes the deck incredibly better. I think this card fits in almost any Skycrag deck and would make a Skycrag deck better, except for, I guess, like Spellcrag. And even then, it might even fit in some Spellcrag decks. Just, it's a powerful effect. Just, stabilizing the board while fixing your hand is really good. In an aggro deck, if you can make a 3/3 flyer and a 1/1, or just a 3/3 and a 1/1 while fixing your hand, that's really good. In Sling, what's like the big problem with Sling? Stabilizing early and also drawing to Sling. This card helps you smooth out your early game problems and digs you faster to Sling. The goal of Sling decks is to draw the Sling. This card gets you a little bit closer. So I think this card is good in Sling. I think this card is good in most Skycrag decks. Maybe not Yetis, but even then, Yetis empties their hand really quickly, and then most decks don't empty their hand, but Yetis does, and so this deck could play this card and just draw 2 cards off the Crafty Occultist. So I think this card is bananas, bonkers good.
I agree that makes the Sling decks better, but like in a way that you just stop playing Sling and then you have a better deck.
Well, okay.
Like you just play a mid-range deck and you have Lost or something.
I think you should be playing Sling either, but just like, if you want to play Sling and you want to play the best version of Sling, I think the best version of Sling plays Crafty Occultist very easily.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Like, is this powerful enough to just spawn some sort of like Crafty Occultist into Kenna mid-range archetype? Maybe.
Possibly.
That's pretty strong. Like, that's a good curve. Kenna's been pretty strong, but hasn't had a home.
It's really awkward. The influence is very rough. I don't know if you can make the influence work, and we'll get to why this archetype might be good later, but you can also discard Felrock to this card. Discarding Felrock, making a 3/3, a 5/2, and a 1/1, this card with or without flying, making your opponent discard a card and drawing 2 cards is really, really powerful. I did that once today, and it was very good. I don't know how consistent it is, but it was fun. It was very fun.
All right, we'll see how much of a splash this one makes, because boy, this is an uncommon. I mean, like obviously the rarity means nothing in a set like this, but it's just funny that they made this an uncommon. All right, the next card, Devastation, 6 cost, fire, shadow. It's a spell. Kill an enemy unit, an enemy site, and an enemy relic. Steal the enemy player's remaining power this turn. So it deals with just about anything. I think this is probably going to be reasonable in Expedition, but probably too slow for Throne, being a 6 cost removal spell.
My guess is for Expedition, I'm gonna stick it in the market being an expensive card, somewhat situational card, right? Because if they're not playing relics, or if they're not playing sites, you don't want to play 6 cost kill an enemy unit. The effect of stealing power can be powerful in the set, but on a card like this, it seems awkward and it costs 6. But the effect of killing, getting a 3-for-1 is potentially powerful. So I'm with Sunny. It could be play an Expedition, but probably not in Throne because it's just too expensive for Throne.
All right, let's go to the next one. Evacuation Plan, 4 cost, time, justice, fast spell. Put any number of units into your hand. Play an Exhausted Sentinel with their combined attack and health and battle skills. You can dream up a scenario with this with like Even-Handed Golem or something, or like Desert Alchemist. That's pretty sweet, but I don't think this card's good. It's just way too tempo negative.
I mean, there's like Aegis, but like, yeah, I'm with Sunny. This card's just, it costs 4. That's a lot for this effect. So I'm okay with moving on if you are.
Yeah. Next card is an interesting one. This is Storm Mirage, 2 cost, time, primal, 0/5 illusion, flying, Aegis, and ambush. So really interesting blocker that is difficult to deal with and pretty difficult to attack through. I don't know that this is great in Throne right now, but it's definitely easy to think of a situation in Expedition where this would be great in a control deck or just a deck that's trying to buy some time.
Yeah, depending on what cards come back to Expedition in the future. Cards that this works with, Majestic Skies, making this a 1/6 flying Aegis ambush, obviously is a lot better than a 0/5. And Mother of Skies, combining this with Mom and producing a small child at ambush speed is obviously also really good. Being Aegis flying ambush at a 0/5 is very hard to kill, especially in the early game, so it's a very solid blocker. This card's pretty unassuming. I was discussing this with Sunny earlier on a stream, potentially the Discord. I was like, the reason this card is a 0/5 is that if it was a 0/6, it would slot right into Sling. You would definitely play this in a Sling deck because unlike 0/6s with no text in Primal, this card has Flying, Aegis, and Ambush, which is a lot better than having no text in just every conceivable way. I think this card has some interesting synergy potential in the future. I'm not sure about it currently, but I like the card a lot. Actually, it's surprising that I like the card.
Yeah, I can't think of a Throne deck that would like this. Like, there isn't any, like, playing Control here right now just seems incredibly difficult. There could be, I think it's a tradition, is the 3 factions that this fits into. Control deck somewhere down the line where I don't even know what you'd be doing in that, but, like, it's not crazy to think of.
I think you want to play this with like Mom and like Majestic Skies eventually, but like if you're playing Mother of Skies, you have other craftier lads to be using.
Yeah, I don't think you really want to play this in an aggressive deck. I think you just want to do this to stall for time, right? Like,
Yeah, I
playing
guess. I
around
don't.
Storm Mirage and Shenra Speaks or Harsh Roll just becomes incredibly difficult.
I guess. I don't know. Someday I think it'll be in a good deck.
Yeah, the Burguns of the world will figure this one out.
Yeah, we'll leave this to the Burguns.
Okay, the next one is Somiel Twilight's Call. It's a 5-cost time shadow card, 6/6 Valkyrie with no flying. It's deadly and has summon each player's health becomes 13. I don't think this card's very good. Like, 5 for 6/6 deadly is, I guess that's not the worst rate in the world, but the summon effect, it doesn't fly, first of all. The summon effect, each player's health becomes 13, unless you can capitalize on that immediately and just attack for the win, or have some sort of combo involving this card, bring them down to 13, then deal 13 damage to them. I don't think that this is going to amount to much.
I disagree a little bit for a couple of specific reasons. One, I think you have to consider this card as sort of like versus an aggro deck as sort of like a gain 8, potentially a gain 5 to gain 8. How good is a 5-cost 6/6 that says deadly summon gain 8, summon gain 5? Well, we have seen Lumen Defender, the 5-cost 1/5 that
Oh,
deadly
yeah, I
summon gain
guess
5.
so.
Right? So if you consider this as a gain 5, this card is just strictly better than Lumen Defender because, being a 6/6 is better than being a 1/5. Having the 6 health means it can survive more, it can tangle more with aggression, and it can also put the beat down on the opponent, especially when you make their health 13. So I think this card is really good versus aggro decks, especially. I'm gonna say it's in the market. Another reason I think this card is potentially good in the market is that we have a card called Crack the Earth, and there's actually like we're bereft of good 5-cost cards with situationally powerful effects. And I think this card is a situationally powerful effect you'd want in specific situations. And I think being at a unique cost for such an effect, I think makes them potential in a 5-cost card, especially maybe something like a Rat Cage deck, for instance, that sometimes needs to also handle the early game and have some aggression to stop.
An example of an unexpected Crack the Earth market card is Marsh Dragon, which was fantastic,
Yeah.
but like also not a card you look at and say this is constructed playable. The one thing about Marsh Dragon is that, like, if your opponent has 10 attack on the board and you are at 10 or something, or at 9, you're still gaining a ton of health. In this case, you could be in a situation where you're only gaining a couple health. Like, sure, that's welcome, and this is big, but it is a little awkward in that it's not always going to gain as much health as some of the other cards. But you're right. Like, if you're against an aggro deck, you can probably find a situation where playing this is going to give you like at least 5 health, which is definitely nice.
I mean, it's kind of just like a medium card, but like a big medium Xenan card is right up my alley. So I feel like I'm obligated to like this card.
I'm kind of turning around on this. By itself, it's kind of awkward, but like definitely against aggro decks, you want to close the door on them, right? And that's a big thing, is giving them as few turns once you've turned the corner to draw their lethal burn or whatever they need in order to close to sneak a win, basically.
That's one of the cool things about it, is that it does both, right? It helps you defend against aggro and helps you turn the corner by reducing their life total significantly, potentially, and also threatening it heavily. It's not like individually powerful. It's not like obviously powerful like Crafty Occultist, right? But it's like on a holistic level, when you look at it in the space of the metagame, in the space of what it's doing in the deck list, it has a surprising potential.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of convinced on this. I think this will be a good market card.
Speaking of potentially good market cards, although maybe not as good as Somiel, we have a Gravity Rifle, which is a fun name for a card with some fun art. Gravity Rifle is 5 Justice, Primal, so 2 Haru, for a 4/8 relic weapon. Your avatar can attack the enemy player if they have no flying units. So if there's no flyers, it has unblockable. but your avatar can't attack units without flying. So if your opponent has, 2/4/4s on the ground and you have Gravity Rifle, but it looks like you're just getting in for 4 and gaining 8 health. But if your opponent has a bunch of flyers, you can slowly pick them off. And if the board is obviously empty, or you both just smashing Sandstorm Titans into each other, you can obviously just attack past them.
Yeah, this one's a really weird one. I don't really know what to make of this. I mean, it's the perfect thing to play behind Dovid, right? Like at rate, it's pretty big. We don't have 4/8 weapons for 5, although I guess Backbreaker is like also very, very large.
Backbreaker costs 6 now, though.
Yeah. Oh, I guess they did have to nerf that. That's true. But I mean, what relic weapons do we have that like attack for 5 or more at 5? There's the one that silences something when you attack and that can attack sites.
The 4/5?
That one's pretty good. Yeah, that one costs 5.
We have the card that you've always stuck in the like Haru markets or whatever. Some on and off again. We have the 5 cost 4/4. This is the enemy player can't play cards on your turn.
Yeah, Hammer of Authority. That one really gets them. This is a really difficult card to evaluate. I think it's not very good, but like, I don't know, maybe we just have a ton of board stalls where you have a Dovid and they can't deal with it. They can't attack through your Dovid or something, and you just get to hit them with a gravity rifle. Maybe that's a thing.
I kind of like it in the markets because, as I like to say, it's a situationally powerful effect with 2 situations that I don't think are that uncommon, right? If your opponent's playing a number of flyers, you can obviously pick them off. And if your opponent has no units or there's a board stall going on, it can obviously slowly pressure your opponent that way. Another thing is obviously just like with Somiel, it's a 5-cost card. This card is an interesting effect to put in a 5-cost market. So if that ever becomes an expedition thing again, maybe it has another place. But a very odd card indeed. I definitely would Sunny. This card's one of the harder to evaluate in the whole set, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting as a 5-cost card, but this is like a very different card that you would put in a Crack the Earth deck, because those decks are usually like destruction factions in order to take advantage of the fact that you have a 1/1.
Yeah. There was one time in Expedition, though, that there was Time Justice Primal Control decks. I remember it because it was the one time Bastion of the Dawn was ever playable, ever in Eternal's history, because it was just a card that was like, it barely met the requirements of a card that was needed. A 5-cost card that gave you a little bit of value and dealt with some relics. The deck existed at one point in Expedition, and maybe it will again. And if it does, and this card's in the format, it could show up.
All right, let's go on to the next one. Endless Step Rebuilder. What a name. It's a 3-cost 6/5 in Shadow and Justice. At the start of your turn, put a unit from your Void into your deck. If you can't, exhaust this and take 2 damage. I don't think this card is good. I think it's too much work, and just being a 3/5 with no battle skills or like summon effects just doesn't excite me.
I never really processed the name out loud before until you said it. That name is it's a really striking name, and the art's really good on the card. Being said, something kind of hit the nail on the head. It requires a lot of work for, I guess, a decent enough payoff. But I mean, you have like Champion of Chaos, which is, a similar amount of work per se, except potentially even less, that has, a better body. Being a Sentinel is interesting for, Sentinel synergies, but it's in Shadow, which is like, do you want to be playing Shadow Sentinels? I don't know. I like the name. I like the art. Card itself is kind of eh.
Yeah, not too hot. The next one is hot. Man, the best cards in this set are both uncommons. What are the chances? Okay, Grenahen. This one has a lot of people talking. People thought it was bugged, but no, it's actually just that good. 2-cost 1/3 Grenadin Bird in Primal and Shadow, so Feln. Has Lifesteal and Summon, draw a unit, or draw a spell that deals damage from the top 3 cards of your deck and discard the rest. Kind of bad templating with the words. It's not entirely clear. But you get any unit from the top 3 cards, or if you have a damaging spell, one of those. And you discard the other cards. So you could hit a Fell Rock off of this and make your opponent discard. So, 2-cost Fell Rocks plus draw card seems pretty good to me if that's what you can get.
No, Sunny, you're not living the dream hard enough. It's not 2-cost discard Fell Rock, draw a card. It's 2-cost discard Fell Rock, draw an even-handed Golem. Because this card is also an even-costed card. Even Feln is looking super hot right now. This card just, digging further to even-handed golems is, what you want to do in life. And this card is also a Grenadin, so it has potential Grenadin synergy, which there's a number of. This card also has Lifesteal and is a 1/3. Do you remember Glasshopper, Sunny? Glasshopper being a 2-cost 1/3 that drew you a card?
Yep. But, well, I mean, that one also ramped you, but yeah.
This card I think is just a lot better than Glasshopper, to be honest. Like, you have to warp your deck about as much as Glasshopper, but you have more conditions that you can draw from. You're not limited to, the one card you happen to pledge on turn one. Has lifesteal, which I think is really big, especially versus an aggro deck, versus any opponent that's trying to put the pressure on you. Having a 1/3 lifesteal is a lot better than just a 1/3. And of course, as Sonny said, you get to discard the cards too, which is a lot better. Now, you have to be playing at least 30 hits for this, if not more. At 30 hits, you have about a 78% chance to draw a card by playing this. Once you go up to 40 hits, which I think is, pretty much the top end of where you want to be, you have a 90% chance to draw a card when you play this. When you go up to 50, you only go to 96.5, so I'm not sure you gain that much by adding the extra 10 cards and, being forced to play potentially suboptimal choices. If you're playing a sacrifice deck, you can't play combust, and, so you have to play lesser cards. So I think 30 to 40 is about where you want to be with this card. This card's absurd. I've seen this card today a lot, and it's just the real deal. The Grenadin bird, the Grenahen is just nuts. I thought like my Crafty Chow was gonna be the best card in the set, and it still holds a very dear place in my heart. But the Robot Chicken is clearly the best card in the set, hands down.
Yeah, I mean, who cares what the ratios are? It gets you closer to that even-handed golem, and that's what you want. Yeah, I mean, this card seems fantastic. I'm totally against playing 2/1 tribal aggro against this. It just seems terrible if people are playing a lot of this and even-handed golem. And the fact that you could randomly mill a Fel Rock and get your opponent is absurd. Like, I don't know what to say about that. That's ridiculous. I guess it won't happen very often. You have to hit a Fel Rock in the top 3 and have another thing that you can get out of the top 3, so it's not going to happen very often, but boy, when it does, it's absolutely backbreaking. Yeah, I mean, it's just even-handed golem number 2.
I mean, even if you just draw a Fel Rock off this, that's still really good because, putting Fel Rock in your hand means that in the future, you'll draw some sort of discard outlet. This card is also the second is the reason I was alluding to earlier for why you might want to try seeing if the influence on Crafty Occultist and Fel Rock can work, because Crafty Occultist and Grenahen seem like they're a match made in heaven because they both work really together. They both draw into each other. They both, put cards in the hand that help you do things. They curve into each other. They both actually pretty low on influence requirements, Fel Rock excluded, which maybe you shouldn't be excluding Fel Rock here because it seems like a necessary part of Grenahen. But they're low on influence. They 2 and 3 cost cards. They seem really good together. And they're both multi-faction. They both fit with a Mother of Skies deck if that's a thing. I think that you should be thinking about the rates. Like, this card doesn't fit in I don't remember who brought it to Worlds, but the Feln at any cost with basically no units and very few damaging spells. This card obviously doesn't fit in the deck like that. You want to have 30 to 40 hits. If you don't have 30 to 40 hits, if you're a mostly unitless spell deck where your spells are all annihilates and defiles, this card will not be very good. So I think you do have to warp your deck slightly, maybe even significantly, but it's worth warping your deck to making this card good because this card is that good.
Yeah, I was mostly just talking about even decks.
Oh, sure.
Then you don't have to, but once you're not on an even-handed golem deck anymore, I do think you should definitely pay attention to the rates that you're hitting on this.
The interesting thing compared to like Crafty Occultist is that Crafty Occultist, I think you really do need to think about building a specific deck for. I think you really do need to think about where it fits in the deck and the curve and what's going on and, trying to maximize it by playing Jotun Hurlers or Zoes or Krulls or whatever, other cards with Fate, things to do with it, especially because you have to discard and then draw. So there's a lot of thought involved in Crafty Occultist. Grenahen, on the other hand, is just throw it into even Feln, throw it into a Feln deck, have a good day. Like, you just play it. You might have 3 options of cards to choose from, and that is a choice, and that could be very hard to do. But overall, this card's, a lot more straightforward. Just draw a card. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, that brings us to our last card of the set, Grand Builder. You're kind of excited about this one, but I think it's lousy. It's a 4-cost factionless card. It's a 3/3. Summon, gain 3 influence in a faction of your choice. Entomb, gain 3 health. I just don't think it's worth paying that much for influence gain.
I mean, I'm less interested in this card now that we've seen Grenahen. Although Grenahen draws it, so it's synergy, right? But to clarify my thoughts on Grand Builder, because I think the card is worth discussing, I think the card has a good potential, actually, because I feel like we shouldn't be underestimating the power of ramping influence, especially when it's 3 at a time. That's a pretty big deal. Ramps up to a Kantha really heavily. It turns on Stealth Strike by itself, more or less. You're trying to reach 6 influence, you're trying to reach more than that, it can push you there, right? Obviously, at any cost is one of the first things you're thinking about, because Shadow has a lot of payoffs for heavy influence, like Stealth Strike, like at any cost. This card, it helps you stabilize in some respects by gaining you 3 life if it dies, so it's not useless there. Obviously, it's factors in anything. It is expensive, though, as Sunny did state. 4 is a lot, although its effect is, I think, reasonably powerful. I think it is deserving of the cost, because if it costs 3, or heaven forbid it costs 2, then it would be absurdly busted. That, if it was like a 2 cost 1, it would be absurdly busted. We've seen Interloper, and this card would just be, insanely better than Interloper. So I think the card does need to cost 4. I think this card is possibly degenerate and possibly could be absurd in the future. This card, I think, has some of the highest potential upside for a future deck. It's not Grenahen obviously levels of like, oh, this card is just absurdly busted, but this card could enable some very busted things in the future. I guess one thing I also like to clarify for more strategy elements is symbols are better than this card by a significant portion. The fact that symbols don't cost a card in your deck, they don't cost actual power. I guess they sort of cost 1 power, but not really. This card gives you 3, but the difference is that you also don't need to have that much to make symbols good, right? Like if you look at like Kira decks, Kira has Kira and Intrusion and a card, right? It only has these 3 cards. So, Kira, while it loves to get as much as possible, it doesn't need to ramp it as hard as Grand Builder allows you to do, because just playing the game will get you enough justice you need. It's not trying to go as quick as possible, as soon as possible, without having power in play. There's sort of a big difference between what symbols allow you to do and what Grand Builder allows you to do. And I think that difference is extremely important to note, and where this card fits differently than symbols do. If we have like, Lawman, remember Lawman, Sonny? You play Lawman, you play Grand Builder, you get 6 influence in a single instant. That's a lot of influence. But yes, overall, I don't think the card will see as much play as I might have considered earlier, especially because, well, Grenahen exists now, and I'm more interested in that nonsense.
Yeah, I think that it's just like the how to fit it into a game plan is kind of tough. 4 is where you need
Yeah.
to start doing like huge things, like play a Sight or play a Sandstorm
Yeah.
Titan or something more powerful than a Sandstorm Titan. And just gaining influence, I don't think is good enough, especially since that's the type of effect you need to play at the beginning of the game, and then later, like redundancy is not usually good with this type of effect because you're trying to hit some sort of threshold. So I think if it cost like 3 and was a 2/2, like maybe it might be, because you're still in like some sort of developing stage of the game at that point, but you're not in like haymaker zone, and this is not really a haymaker.
Yeah, the M Gallop heuristic is, ignore cards that cost more than 3. M Gallop's like, is there a 4 in the corner? It's garbage. Unless it's, absurd, like say like Honor of Claws to discard Felrock, right? That's still a really positive interaction. That's sort of a haymaker play, right? Drawing 3 cards and playing a 5/2 that makes your opponent discard a card. That's a solid haymaker move, but playing just a 3/3 is not. So I think Sonny's kind of hit the nail on the head there, where once you reach 4, you want to start, really putting the nail in the coffin there, and this card doesn't necessarily do that.
Yeah. The whole does the card have a 4 in the corner? I think when we talk about our top 3 cards from the set, that's going to show that
Yeah.
we don't like any cards that cost 4 or more, at least not nearly as much as the other cards. So do you have your top 3 cards ready? I think we're picking the same 3 cards.
So my number 3 is Tarra, Ever Loyal. What is your number 3, Sonny?
Oh man, I don't know, but if your number 3 is Tarra, and I know what your 1 and 2 are, we chose the same 3 cards. I suspect Tarra might be better than either Crafty Occultist or Grenahen. I'm going to say Tarra's better than Grenahen. I think Grenahen is my number 3.
Okay.
Tarra's probably my number 2. You know what? I'm just gonna go for it. Tarra's my number 1 in this set. Crafty Occultist number 2, Grenahen number 3.
So my number 2 is Crafty Occultist. My number 1 is going to be Grenahen. Although in my heart, my crafty lad, my child, is number 1. But so coming out of this cast, I was like, because I've seen rumblings on Discords, whatever, on Reddits about Tarra being meh, not good, maybe Expedition Plan. But I was like, I'm gonna come on this cast and I'm gonna make a bold claim that I think Tarra is good. And then Sonny's like, no, I'm gonna make an even bolder claim that Tarra is great. And I'm like, well, fine. I guess you can make the more controversial claim, Sonny.
Well, I'm also including Expedition in this estimation, and I think it's just going to be incredible in Expedition.
I am too. I'd still put Terra as my number 3, even including Expedition. But yeah, so we had sort of the same 3 picks. So before we went over the set, I thought the set was kind of a little dull. going into this spoiler review, to be honest. Like, I've been thinking about these cards, and I'm like, whatever. A lot of these cards are like, whatever. We got Grenahen spoiled today, and that obviously, was very powerful. But going over the cards like this, a lot of them seem more interesting than they gave them credit for, at the very least of, like, making a fun deck archetype, being an interesting playable, putting in the market. So the set has more going on for it than I initially gave it credit for.
Yeah, and I think that's where a small set should be. Like, I don't think we want any Jacks, right? We don't
No.
want any Miloses or those types of cards.
I mean, the closest things we have to those things are obviously the 3 cards we picked as the best cards from the set. And we'll see if any one of them manages to, be on the level of Jack.
Yeah, well, while all these cards are good, I don't think they have the ceiling that Jack had.
No, Jack had an absurd ceiling.
You haven't lived until you've won a tournament killing, like, Mother of Skies plus some other 4/4 with Jack.
I mean, that being said, I think cards like Grenahen and Crafty Occultist might be unassumingly powerful compared to Jack. They're obviously absurdly powerful, just like, because Jack does a lot when it comes into play, where Grenahen only, in quotes, only draws you a card, right?
Yeah, they both draw cards.
Okay, yeah, Jack, you're right. Jack does everything. Never mind. Jack's just like, Jack was absurd, wasn't he? Wasn't Jack just absurd, Sonny? Why? Yeah, Jack was filthy.
Every time I see a Jack with double damage, I'm just like, this card is totally off the rails. Anyway, we're running kind of late, but we do want to get some amount of metagame breakdown in here. A lot of this is going to be similar to our episode with Doc about 2 weeks ago, so go check that out if you want perhaps a little more discussion about that. But the top deck going into this tournament has to be Kira, right?
Yeah, I think Kira is the front runner in my opinion for a level 1 deck. I'm not super positive about how popularity is going to stack up. As power level is concerned, I think this deck is sort of the deck to be aware of in the biggest.
Well, I mean, it's a Throne tournament. Every time we have a Throne tournament, there are a lot of people playing Flavor of the Month, but there are also a lot of people just playing, whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they've been playing for a long time.
I mean, as far as new cards go, maybe Gravity Rifle sees playing Kira. I don't know exactly if it sees playing the mark, whatever, but the deck is relatively unchanged. And while there's one big newcomer, Kira's obviously the big front runner. Kira is still a very powerful deck. We tested a couple of brews today versus Kira, and Kira just, still stomps and still does really good things like even when the other decks go off, suddenly Kira's like, oh, I'm gonna play a Palace and give my Kira +4/+4 and then give my Hojin another +8/+8, and that's still a really powerful play. So you have to know how to play the deck though, because it's not quite as skill testing as our next deck on the list, but it is still very skill testing.
That's good news for me. Happy to hear that. All right, our next deck on the list is Elysian, of course. Even despite the nerfs, Elysian's still very powerful. Probably a notch down from Kira. I think, that was solidified for me in the last Tuesday Night Eternal.
I think Elysian could still show up. We obviously have Doc, who, you can never count out playing Elysian at this point, because she realized her mistake and realized that, wait a minute, what if I just keep playing the deck that's good, that's great, and I'm also a great pilot at it? Maybe that's a winning combination. So we'll see if they keep that up. But I kind of think going into our third on our list, I think that Elysian is going to see much less play than it might have otherwise, because a lot of the quote-unquote best players, the top players on the teams, like rank stars and stuff, are really looking into this Feln archetypes, specifically even Feln. Grenahen is really, really, really powerful and really allows the deck to have an absurd level of consistency. Gives it great early game, gives it good late game, helps you find more golems to draw more cards. I think even Feln and Kira are very good decks right now, and are going to see lots of popularity.
Yeah, I think that if you don't know what to play, and you don't want to have to worry about playing a deck that's too hard, I would say even Feln. Just go for it. Even-handed Golem, Grenahen, Felrock, Shadow Icaria, just
Maveloft Huntress.
Yeah. I don't know if you play Huntress because, you're heavy Shadow. I think you want to be the heavy Shadow version.
No, it's not Sunny. You're playing Felrock, so you want to be playing 3 primal cards
in
turn 1, 2, and 3 anyways.
Anyway. Okay,
you're playing 16 or 20 primal duels. You're playing Maveloft Huntress because it's the best card in the game.
Okay, fine. All right, play your Maveloft Huntress, but also importantly, play your even-handed Golems, play your Felrocks, and just dump it all out on the table. You know what they say. Other Feln decks, what do we think?
There's not even Feln, which is even Feln, but it's playing odd cards, and it's probably worse.
I don't think that deck is good. You get Kroll, but I don't think it's worth it. I just don't think it's nearly as
You could
good.
be playing classic Reanimator with Grenahen as well, like with Azendels and the old reanimation packages, and that could be a thing.
I think that's worth Benzine and Reanimator. Just like the explosiveness and consistency of the Xenan deck is so good.
Grenahen is the real deal.
Yeah, it is, but like in an Reanimator deck, things like Katra. Katra is such an incredible card, and you also get insignias because you're not playing a random off faction Azendel, and you also get the Hourglass, which is a huge deal.
My controversial take is I'm not sure Xenan Reanimator Hourglass is that good in Xenan Reanimator anymore.
That's possible.
I don't know. I've been contemplating that for a while. I'm not sure about it anymore.
Well, it was like, I don't know, it's awkward because it doesn't add to your unit count, and we could go on with this for a while.
We'll not go on. We'll not go on to that. But
but man, Katra is incredible. Katra is crazy.
the next on our list of decks to be aware of, although I think that they were sort of a flash in the pan. You might run into one or two on the day one, but I think they were kind of a flash in the pan deck before Stormbreak was released. Is the Clear the Way combo decks. This is relying on playing 3 relics, and then you play Clear the Way to sack the 3 relics. Specifically, you can relics that have Entombed, have powerful things, Bottled Storm, and Waystone Gate to do lots of things. You put in 2 9-cost units. You then reweave or fair exchange them into Kairos or powerful cards from your market, and you try to leverage those to win the game. I'm not too keen on them anymore. I think that there are other cool decks now, and I think a lot of people are going to possibly feel the same. So
I think there are other cool decks now, but I think that the Clear the Way deck is actually real. I think that people are getting a lot better at building them. Like, something that I've noticed is people are noticing that the Power Glove, or whatever it's called, the 1-cost Amplify relic weapon,
the Gravity Glove
works really well because you can...
The Power Glove.
Yeah, because you can get it off of Dovid, and you can get it off of the Align the Stars. It's just like a really nice flex spot in order to make the deck more consistent. And then there's stuff like drawing a 5/5 off of Okessa's Audience in order to put it into play when you attack with your 2/3/6s. It does a pretty good job of playing a fair game. I mean, obviously you need Clear the Way, and that's not particularly fair. But like, once you get to that stage, I feel like it does a pretty good job of playing a fair game, but also has the unfair way of getting Kairos and then getting whatever and just killing them. So I think those decks are actually good enough and consistent enough to be real and might show up in Force.
Show up in Force, you say? You think that they're going to show up at like 10-20% of the metagame?
They've been popular in the last 7 days, right? So, 3 days from now, when day 1 is, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of Clear the Way decks that people are running.
I would, but it would be cool if you were right. So we'll see. We'll see.
Before today, I would have said Fire Aggro is like a reasonable choice, and it's pretty unchanged. But if you want to run into Grenahen all day and wonder why your Oni runs can't make a reasonable attack, yeah, it's going to be rough. It's not impossible, but it is going to be rough, I think.
If you're playing Fire Aggro, you have to be playing a bigger Fire Aggro with 2 drops, not 1 drops, right? You have to be playing like Stone Scar based Fire Aggro, where you're not playing 1 drops. You're playing Midchief Saluses or 8 1s with Overwhelm, or Sills, right? You got to be playing bigger things. You can't be playing 2-1s. A 2-1 stat line's not good right now. 2-1 is probably the worst stat line in the game right now.
Yeah.
Next on the list is a deck that I put down, but something's bad. I'm taking a look at Shrine decks. I think Carvet Shrine, Sunny's favorite name in Eternal Carvet. I think there's a chance that Carvet could be really good. The Shrine decks could still be pretty powerful. But Sunny doesn't think so.
I think they're just way too inconsistent. Too many moving parts. Next.
Next is sort of the Xenan decks, where we have Xenan Reanimator and Shadow Xenan, which do similar things in many ways. Although basically Shadow Xenan is a little bit slower, is a little bit less explosive, but still very similar. Like Shadow Xenan, I believe, still plays like VAR in the market, just not in the main deck. Both of them are just kind of big mid-range Xenan decks. They're trying to be over the top of the opponent, a little bit faster, a little bit slower. Very similar decks. They're fine. I don't think they're particularly like great right now, but they're fine.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like a fair amount of removal. You might run into a matchup where you can't interact, and then you're in a lot of trouble. But like all the matches where you can interact, where your removal's hitting their units, and then you're playing like Tazbu or Akaria or something like that, like that's pretty good. But it's not something I'm considering working on leading up to these last few days.
So we've spoken a lot about Sling over in this cast too, and a lot of the other casts. Inconsistent, powerful. You'll see it. It's actually, I don't think, the most unreasonable thing to take. Acknowledging that it's inconsistent, and you probably won't make it, but you could make it because inconsistent but powerful can get there sometimes. So A lot of people have fun with Sling. I think Sling is bad, and I think Sling is unfun, but people do have fun with it. They should be allowed to have fun.
I'm telling you, Slingless Sling. Crafty Occultist into Kenna into Rost. That's your curve.
No
Go
Sling?
wild.
I like it. Hey,
No
just get rid of Sling. Just no Sling?
Yeah,
Good God.
then you don't have to play garbage siege breakers in there.
Okay, so in case you guys, if you have been playing on ladder, you might have seen a 2, 3, most time it's actually a 4 faction Dichro's Ruin deck. It's just, I think it's a meme I put down as garbage, but somebody did make the sort of mostly correct note that it's very good against even Feln. It's bad against a lot of decks, but against even Feln specifically, the Dichro's Ruin decks can actually be quite powerful.
Yeah, they can't remove. Oh, so they don't have transpose, so they can't Fate Sage just block it. They've got exploit, but only if they go first and exploit, like hit it out of your hand. And they have no way of removing it, and they draw a million cards. It's actually like you can Dichro's Ruin. Like if you get it down early, you can get an even Felon deck with Dichro's Ruin. It's pretty sweet.
And the deck's also slow enough that even though you're sort of time walking yourself by playing a Dichro's Ruin or multiple Dichro's Ruins, the deck's slow enough that you can then react to it because it's an even deck, so it can't have an explosive start and it can't make really tempo efficient plays on odd turns.
Yeah. And I mean, they play a lot of 2-drops, so you also get to sweep them up with Airmott's designs, which is something I think you want if you're playing Dichro's Ruin. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, it's small, basically, right? It's got some matchups that are really, really good, especially when you're on the play.
Yeah.
And then it's got some matchups that you're just hoping to somehow get there with your pile of cards that don't really do anything.
I guess that's the reason that I don't think the deck is pretty well placed right now, is that I thought Maul was good once in Eternal's history, and that was when FJS was literally, I don't mean, I'm not figuratively, I don't mean I'm exaggerating, it was literally 75% of the meta. Like the ECQ was 75% top 64 was FJS. That was the only time I thought Maul was ever a reasonable deck on competitive level. I think this meta is way too open for a Dichro's Ruin style deck to be that good. Although again, inconsistent but powerful, could still get there if you just happen to luck into 26 even Felon decks.
Well, yeah, I think it's just going to be really good against the best deck, or sorry, the most represented deck in the metagame, because I just kind of expect even Felon to be the deck that most people are bringing. So, it's one of those. I also like the thing about Maul is that playing open deck lists against Maul gave you a huge advantage also. And
same with Dichro's Ruin.
Quite as true with Dichro's Ruin.
It's a little bit. It's still a little bit.
Yeah, true. It's true to an extent. Anyway.
So the next deck we have Sunny wants to shill his own mono timeless and he put lulz next to. So I'll let Sunny just describe this one.
Okay. So this actually has more to do with just the metagame and if you can spot a key weakness in the metagame. Because remember when Cassandrith qualified for Worlds with that Xenan deck? This was when Severin Reap was popular. And all he was doing was like waiting until they played a Severin. They used Reap and then used a Talar's Intervention from the market to silence it, which stopped the Reap from happening. And then he ground those decks out because they couldn't answer. They were an even deck, so they couldn't answer Grodov's Burden. So he basically beat all those decks with 2 cards, which was hilarious to watch. This was the last chance qualifier, the 2020 Worlds season. So it was just really interesting to me as a viewer that someone could win a tournament basically with just 2 cards. And we might be in a position, if you can find the weakness in even Feln, if you can find the weakness in Kira, where you might be able to get the old Talar's Intervention into Grodov's Burden and just kill people because they can't deal with the answer that you're using to shut off their strategy, and then they can't deal with the threat that you're providing to close out the game. So I just wanted to point that out because that was an eye-opening moment for me, I gotta say.
And moving on, I'm just gonna describe, going back to one of my ideas. I'm gonna go back to talk about what I think are the pillars of the format, the decks that I think are the most important. Now, I think this format's actually potentially relatively diverse, although it's gotten less diverse as time progressed. Recently, the meta seemed to be like lots and lots of even Feln before the set was released, and now the set's released, and now we have Grenahen. So, obviously, the big pillar is going to be Grenahen. I think Grenahen's going to be Feln, in particular, even Feln is going to be the most important deck. Also, another pillar is Kira. I think Kira should potentially be the first deck, first pillar, but it probably isn't. It's probably the second one. Then after that, for a third pillar, I'm going to label Sling decks as sort of what I think are going to be third on the pillar. Not because I think the Sling decks are particularly great, but because I think Sling decks are going to be particularly popular. So I think Kira, Feln, and Kira, even Feln, and Sling are sort of the three decks, what I consider to be the pillars of the format currently. We'll see, though. There's still 3 days to brew with this set, and, things could shake up very differently in 3 days.
I'll tell you right now, I am almost 100% bringing Kira. I don't think that's a shock to anyone. I have a million reps with the deck.
Oh my goodness, that's such a revelation.
Yeah, I've been tuning my list for like half a year at this point. So I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but I also don't think it's the only reasonable option. But I am definitely looking forward to playing Kira this weekend if that's what I bring.
It's the only reasonable option for Sunny.
It's a tough deck to play. So like I don't expect, like you say, it's a pillar of the metagame, and I definitely think that there are going to be plenty of good players and like medium players that bring it. But like I think that the win percentage of Kira drops off pretty steeply with play skill. Wow, that sounded pretentious AF.
Yes,
okay.
It did.
Yeah, okay.
First things that I'm considering playing. Now, obviously, I want to be playing with my crafty child, the crafty lad. I want to be playing with. I want to hold. I want it to make special Grenadin friends and gain flying. But we only have 3 days, and it's possible that I, can't find a list that I'm happy with the card in it. So if that happens, I might just go back to Kira or Elysian potentially, or even Feln. I don't know. One of those 3 decks. But if I can, I want to be playing a Crafty Occultist deck.
Sling the Sling, man. I'm telling you, it's going to be the hotness.
I mean, maybe. Anyways, so just to finish up, it's been a long cast. We're going to discuss the dates to remember. It's only been a few days, so the dates are still the same as before, with the exception that today we had the new set release. So on March 26th in the morning, depending on your time zone, we have Tuesday Night Eternal. In this case, it is the Expedition format, though. So don't bring your Throne deck, obviously, because that's not allowed. And that being Expedition is actually interesting because it means that you're not afraid of leaking your secret tech, right? Because the next Expedition tournament's in a month, so you can't reasonably keep any Expedition tech secret for a month, especially because there'll probably be a better deck made in a month. So bring a fun deck to the Teeny on this Friday. Also on this Friday is day 1 of the Stormbreak Throne Open. That also will coincide with Saturday. So those 2 days, that I think 36, 48-hour period, we have the Throne Open, our first big tournament of the season. And then on Sunday, March 28th, we have the day 2. We have our top 64 casted by Direwolf once again. Long time since we've had a fun tournament, top 64. And I'm going to be watching, and I hope that you all be watching too along with us.
I think it's worth mentioning also that on Tuesday, following the Open, on March 30th, we also have another Tuesday Night Eternal. So that's going to be Expedition again. That'll be awesome. As always on FECast, we are supported by our generous patrons who help let us pay the bills, right? So thank you to these fine folks for supporting us week in, week out. We have Pre-Ribbon, Work Done Son, Camomilk, Chrissy, D-Dub, and Yeast Out. Thank you so much for supporting FECast and all things Friends of Eternal. You can donate to the show and the cause at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Finally, a huge shout out to our editor, SRFS, who also made some changes to the Eternal History Project. If you don't know what that is, you should definitely check it out. Stats on all of the big players in Eternal, and recently added the match win percentage of the top 64, basically how well people do once they reach the top 64. Check it out. It's awesome. And thank you, SRFS, for putting all that together.
Link in description.
All right. And finally, thank you for listening to FECast. Give us a review, tell a friend, all those things that people who podcast say, and keep listening because we'll have, we'll break down the results next time, I'm sure, our next cast. So thanks for listening. See you next time. And until then, we will see you in the friend zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels, all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the Friend Zone.